Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Katrina Glogowski, angel investor and attorney, to help us talk about the highs and lows of the industry and what the smoke signals are going to predict for 2020 and beyond. Katrina, thanks for being back on the podcast.
Good morning, Josh. And my Bills made the playoffs.
They did. The Seattle Seahawks were not doing so hot, though, so I don't even want to talk about it. All right, so looking at some cannabis stocks last year, it looks like there was about 100 that were trading up in Canada. There's maybe 40 now, so already have a lot of consolidation, 60% just by that alone. And so looking at the capital crunch and crisis of confidence, this article from Benzinga talks about the weakness in the cannabis-listed weed stocks have been one of the biggest negative factors for the index. And so Alan Brockstein talks about some issues that he points out, including licensed producers haven't scaled well. Issues with timely inspections from regulators have hampered growth. And there's been problems with distribution amid lack of retail stores, as well as companies have been slow to introduce new cannabis products and develop international markets. I'd say it's probably all of those things, everything we've seen from every single rollout of every new state. Slow rollouts, they delayed what was called Cannabis 2.0 with a lot of the derivatives, edibles, drinks, all of that. We're a year later. Distribution, it's easy to have a product. It's harder to sell it, especially when you're trying to get product into Germany, 70 million medical patients potentially. And if you irradiate the cannabis, they're not going to allow it. We talked about that last week. Licensed producers haven't scaled well. They have the capital, but they're more like a PR firm. They're not scaling the way they need to. I don't know about the inspections with regulators and how that should play a role. If you're on the up and up, shouldn't really matter.
The inspections, the only thing I can really think of related to that would be the stunted growth in Ontario, Toronto, where there's only 5 in the city limits. So that's I don't know if that has to do with inspections or if that has to do with the licensing issues, but I'm unaware of inspection issues being an issue in Canada, so I'd like to talk to Mr. Brockstein about that.
Mm-hmm. So the U.S. markets have been doing well. They've got some weak recreational rollouts. California, Massachusetts, for whatever reason, is kind of following Washington State's rules on limiting investment from out of state, as well as banning advertisements on billboards. A lot of stuff that we did in 2015 they think is new, is cool, and it's not. It's not going to do anybody any good. I think they'll figure that out eventually, though.
I think so. Massachusetts is going to have the same growing pains that we've seen every other state have, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
I'll figure it out.
It's not all doom and gloom, so the industry lacks some professionalism. We saw some CEOs get kicked out and replaced with, Constellation Brands, for example. They brought in their own CFO, promoted him to the CEO position with Canopy. So there's been a little bit of movement on the CEO forefront on regular Wall Street as well as cannabis. I think we'll see a lot more of that consolidation. But I think that's a good thing. Even though Crapo from Idaho isn't really a fan of cannabis banking, hopefully what made it through the House floor will make it to the Senate, allow for banking to be normalized, eventually leading to legalization. But at least those conversations are happening. And so I guess that's one of the positive points of 2019 is there is some movement.
I think we have been discussing this for most of the year, Josh. The industry is normalizing and the companies are also normalizing. The installation of the CFO from Constellation Brands is, let's not forget, it's a business, so numbers matter. And as far as banking, that's just normalization. We all want to see banking, but it's taking forever, and I don't truly understand what the holdup is with that. Well, I mean, I know the law behind it. I just don't understand why the feds are taking such a long time to address it. But again, this is all standardization and normalization of the industry, and Got to start conducting actual business.
That's exactly right. And looking forward, we're going to talk about some profitability requirements in the future, but that's definitely what's going to be required in 2020 and beyond. So with legalization, in my opinion, I think it's going to take an absolute catastrophe, economically speaking, for them to legalize. They need that finance. They need the money for taxes, but they also have to blame it on the economy in order for them to get reelected from conservative constituents. That's just my opinion. There's $1 billion transportation package that's been sitting around waiting for what I think is going to be that economic downturn. So we'll just kind of have to see when that rolls out, but it's inevitable that with the states rolling out, it should happen at some point regardless.
It'll happen eventually, Josh.
Right. Exactly. So there's some ballot initiatives for legalization next year: New Jersey, Arizona, Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota, Arkansas, Idaho, Mississippi, and Nebraska. So that's not bad. That's a lot of states right there.
I think some of those states are already medicinally legal. I know that Arizona most certainly is. So that's good. And I think medical legalization is a good way to roll out for a new state. Start small, then go big. They're seeing that it's not a catastrophe. Babies aren't dying. People aren't crashing into the school side of the schools, and teenagers aren't dropping out like flies. So why not legalize all the way? Mm-hmm. So that's good.
Yeah, as long as they can stay profitable. And I guess that's one of the last main points, is that at the company level, some of the Canadian companies and US too, they're going to have to achieve some positive cash flows or get some access to capital. And so I think it's going to go hand in hand. People aren't going to be able to go out and raise capital without approving or providing the cash flow statements showing that they are generating revenue. So that's going to weed out even more companies. I think that's a good thing. Rather than having this speculation and just a bloated market, we're going to just have some solid companies that we can begin to look at who the trusted manufacturers are and get right down to some movers and shakers, rather than just a lot of brand names that don't really differentiate with anything. They just have CBD and a name, and that's it. And I think what we've seen with the publicly traded markets dropping 60%, I would expect that or even more consolidation.
I agree with every word you just said. As cannabis legalization expands across the United States, you are going to have to normalize and standardize the industry. It must occur. And if you are an investor, you had better start looking at the actual numbers. It might be cool and sexy to invest in cannabis, and you might want to join the bandwagon. But ultimately, it's a business. I've said this time and time again. If it's not making money, you're not going to make money. And just because it's cannabis doesn't guarantee you're going to make money. You have to have some numbers. You have to have a qualified team. And we've talked about this over the pitch decks that we look at. Just pay some attention to some fundamental investment advice about knowing what you're doing. And you will find companies out there because they are coming. It's coming.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot more restrictions as well. We've seen Facebook and Instagram ban influencers for vaping. So vape companies can no longer hire for that kind of marketing and advertising. It's going to be even more difficult to be a brand name. Quebec and Newfoundland Labrador, they all will not allow cannabis vape sales. And so that's going to hinder some companies being able to be, that brand name up there in Canada. It's definitely going to affect some sales for people who don't really believe in particular brands. There's not a lot of trust yet across the board. And for investor confidence too, I think that's going to be a big deal. So the firms have to focus on profitability, communication. And so Marijuana Business Daily talks about how the cannabis industry is at a crossroads where companies need to differentiate themselves based on profitability, strong and yet simple capital structures, and investor communications. They're looking for companies that want to thrive in a new environment. Generally, you're going to have to improve their focus on corporate governance, shareholder communication, and compliance. If you don't have a compliance department, you're not going to be around very long. So there's a couple companies out there that are kind of trying to focus on that. But in the end, the action steps are just going to be to professionalize in order to succeed in the long term. So according to this investor intelligence analysis, that includes focusing on profitability and cash generation, simplifying cash structures, and communicating transparently with investors.
Agreed, agreed, agreed. Just like every other industry, you need to make your investors happy, and one of the ways to make investors happy is make money. The other way to make investors happy is to let them know that there's a problem before they read about it in Marijuana Business Daily, which is some basic communication. What a way to light up your phone system by not communicating ahead of time.
Exactly.
But I agree with all of that. If you are going to be successful, you can't just have some celebrity front person tout your brand. You need to have a reliable brand, a credible brand, a recognizable brand, and you need a strategy to get your perfect brand out of Colorado into these other states. When it federally legalizes and Philip Morris of the universe and InBev of the universe and Bear Aspirin in the universe come, how are you going to compete? And Jimmy Joe Bob's famous weed ain't going to cut it. You need to plan for this eventuality. And that goes for cannabis brands and CBD brands. It's around the corner. And how on God's green earth are you going to compete against GlaxoSmithKline? How? Because you're not. But you need a plan.
There's a lot of people trying to get in the game, as you can see, just from a basic statistics from taking MJBizCon that just happened. 2015, they had 5,000 in attendance, all the way up to over 30,000 this year. And so when more people are getting into the game, it's bloated. There's more of a bubble. And when everyone has a CBD company, you should expect it to kind of collapse and consolidate. So yeah, without being transparent, without generating revenue, a lot of these guys that had ideas that aren't able to scale are going to be out of business. And so I think there's going to be a huge push for that this year, as we've seen a lot of companies automating. There will be a podcast, so stay tuned for that, all about automation from seed planting all the way to sales and distribution, manufacturing of products like pre-rolls, joints, blunts, everything in between, the entire system, and talking about the impacts and how that's going to change the industry as a whole as companies scale up and try to automate to save some money, keep that margin.
Cost of goods sold is one of the items you should be looking at in your investor communications. How much does it cost to make that pre-roll? How much does it cost to make that CBD infused lotion? And as an investor, you really should be paying attention to those numbers. And are they competitive?
Exactly. Yeah, there's going to be some drop shipping in the industry. I think you're going to have some opportunities. Eventually, you can see that in some ideas, like in California, they have a 20,000 square foot facility where they can showcase and have everything under one roof. Whether or not that's going to be an option in your area, I don't know. But what we've seen with trends over the last several years is that, you know, when you have a 420 holiday sale, that's going to be the new everyday low price for an emerging state like Illinois, who's going to go on board January 1st. And so, you know, if California starts rolling out huge opportunities like this showcase 20,000 square foot mall, I would look for drop shipping to start taking off. And this could be a pretty big indicator if this is a smokescreen solution for a huge area like Canada, like California, and having some of these throughout the region. It could alleviate some of that logistics.
Drop shipping is one thing, but if this is a mall open to a consumer, 20,000 square feet, there are so many choices. It'd be like MJBizCon all over again. It's so much overload. How do you make a decision between the kiosk on the left and the kiosk on the right?
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea. I like the concept. I like the normalization of going into a mall. I like the education of the consumer. Look at how many brands are available. I enjoy all of that. But my dear goodness, that's huge.
Definitely. It's going to be about education. It's going to be about different technology platforms. It's going to be about bud tenders, getting a business in there for vendor days, and not only explaining it to the individuals coming into the store, but trying to educate those customers, because with 25 products, bud tenders are kind of that linchpin. That's that link between bankruptcy and a market share of those billions that are projected. So as there's consolidation, I would try to look towards what 2020 is going to be offering and how to pivot to stay relevant.
Didn't we see a company do something like this called Nordstrom, which put customer service first and wants the individual consumer to have a positive experience? In order for that to happen, they have to know the brands. They have to understand how the brands fit. And if you're a weird size, I'm very short, so if you're a weird size, they got to be able to direct you to the correct product, or you're going to walk away and go to the short people store across the mall. So bud tenders, yeah, we need bud tenders, but again, it's retail. It's not a new concept to have somebody understand the product and walk the consumer through it.
Right. And we've also seen from retail, McDonald's and Nordstrom included, get rid of all of their staff and have tablets. And so Nordstrom in Beverly Hills on Rodeo Drive, they had an employee with no clothes. So you got on your tablet, you ordered it, it went there, and then someone would tailor it to you. So that's kind of what they're transitioning to, is less people. It's the number one expense in the cannabis industry. You can't write that off because of 280E. So all of your employee and labor is not a write-off. And so maybe that's going to be the solution, is delivery, which is also on the automated Cannabis Prediction 2020 podcast, is how to automate all of that, getting rid of this. So you have to come back to the Talking Hedge and stay tuned with that. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. I want to thank my guest, Katrina Glogowski. She's an angel investor and attorney in Seattle. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Josh. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. With that, I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out. Well, hopefully that works.
Is that real?